a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Derry Merkins. I was going to say joining us from the great state of Michigan, but he's back in Florida now. CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. What's up, Cody?
Man, it was a whirlwind tour out there. A lot of fun ailments, but it was a relaxing trip actually, and I learned the difference between like living on the water where the water is a lake versus like living on the water where the water is like the intercoastal or an ocean, and it's totally different, totally different.
Even with a giant lake, or
Yeah,
were
even
you
with
on
like
like Lake Michigan
no,
or
it
something
was
like that?
so. The first thing, it's weird. It wasn't Lake Michigan. It was one of the other smaller lakes, and it was about 4 miles around. So one thing is that lakes aren't tidal, meaning they don't
Mm-hmm.
respond to the tide. So it's always kind of the same level. But like it's completely fresh water, so they leave the boats in all the time. They don't have to
Yeah.
worry about they don't have to worry about cleaning the boats. And I was like, man, this is awesome. That would be so much nicer not having to worry about like scrubbing the boats down and like flushing the engines. All the salt ruins everything. So,
Yeah, exactly.
so,
Super
but
cool.
then I was like, well, does this lake freeze over? And he's like, yeah, yeah. I was like, and everyone had walkout docks. And I was like, so what happens to the docks? And they're like, oh no, you have to break down the docks every year and bring them in. I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
no, 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 no.
And like
That makes it
rebuild
that
your dock in the spring?
Exactly. Like in May, they'll rebuild the dock kind of thing. And the docks aren't nearly as elaborate as say the dock that I have here, where it's kind of like raised and there's like a boat lift, but they're still go all the way out there. And they're still, I can't imagine rolling those out and kind of connecting them and rebuilding them every year. But I guess when the water freezes, ice creates so much pressure that it would just like
Yeah, it would just
explode
snap
the
the wood, right?
poles. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, man, that kind of ruins every benefit of avoiding the salt right there.
Yeah, I would think
But
the time spent building a dock would it'd probably exceed the time spent taking care of a boat.
yeah, especially since you're really talking about like May till the beginning of September, middle of September, like man, that is. I hope you like get the time in
It's not a ton of lake
because
time, huh?
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well, happy belated fourth to all of our viewers. I guess to our British viewers in your face. Um, and let's go ahead and get started with the Country Shore giveaway. We've got Rob M from Atlanta, Georgia, is our winner of the Country Shore giveaway this week. By the way, Country Shore Outfitters is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can sign up for the giveaway on our Facebook page. Rob M has a sweet Country Shore hat, much like this one, coming his way, along with copies of our ebooks, which you guys can check out anywhere ebooks are sold. And while you're on our Facebook page, go ahead and answer the question of the week. Which, Cody, last week, what was the question of the week? Remind them again.
Last week, in an average 5 day
That's right.
work
Yeah,
week,
yeah, yeah.
you work more or less than 9 hours a day, and we're definitely pushing past 5 hour or the more is zooming ahead of the less, which this poll looks like it's going to end in a few minutes. So looks like
It's
more
kind
is
of like
zooming
it's kind of a skewed sample though, because I feel like all of our viewers are workaholics, more or less.
That's that's right. I mean, who would watch this if you weren't a workaholic?
Yeah, this is a live stream for workaholics. What's the question of the week next week?
Do you carry a wallet? And
Okay,
thinking behind,
can you define what constitutes a wallet?
yeah, I guess I should. So anything that like anything that's dedicated as a separate device for carrying like identification, cash, credit cards. So like a billfold would count, a wallet would count. Uh,
I use binder clips. I just
okay,
have one binder clip that holds my money and my credit cards and my gym card and my driver's license. So does that count as a
okay.
wallet?
I think it would.
Yeah, because it's
I mean,
separate. It's separate. I guess the what I see a lot of people do, and my brother does this, is his phone case has slots for like a credit card, driver's license, and some cash.
yep, that's what I got right here. No one take a
Oh, there you
picture of
go.
this. Yep, that's exactly. And that was my question is because number one, and honestly, if there was just a little bit better support for the tap readers, and if driver's license could be put on phones, then I wouldn't even need one of those because my insurance card is on the phone. I have the credit cards
You
in
never use
passport.
cash.
I never use cash. As a matter of fact, like the only time that becomes a problem is when, and I don't valet, but if I'm going somewhere with my girlfriend, she'll valet, and I'm like, I hope you have cash because I don't carry cash. I'm like the worst date in the world.
Or you can give them a firm handshake and say thank you very much.
That's right. That's right. And literally, anywhere I go that requires like cash or tipping, I'll be like, do you have Venmo or I can't remember the name of the other one. And everywhere I go does. So I just tip them through Venmo or whatever the other one is.
Wave of the future, man. All you'll need is a phone.
It's yeah, exactly. I mean, and the thing is, it's like it's weird because when you're using a credit card, all you're doing is it's like a physical device into the internet anyway. I mean, that's all you're really doing.
Just one step removed, basically.
Yeah, it's actually weird that they're still around, but yeah, and we're pretty ubiquitous with the tap readers where you can just tap your phone to the reader and it uses NFC to kind of read your credit card information. So
not to delay the question of the week any longer, but do you think that driver's licenses will ever be mobile based? Do you think we'll ever get away from the card?
Yeah, well, actually, I do, because we passed on a bid, but we were going to bid on a system that allowed identification to be digital. And the reason we passed on it is because several states already have it, including Iowa. And the company who did those was bidding on this one too. So it didn't really make sense to go after that since they kind of have a pretty big.
We're clearly going to win.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's and I don't know if Iowa and the other one, which I can't remember, has gone live, but the technology is there. They may have just been working out the legal ramifications of it or whatever. But
I guess what's interesting is I would imagine my gut reaction is that it would be less secure to have a digital card. It'd be easier to create a fake ID. But I guess if I'm sort of imagining like in Ocean's 13 when they mess around with their faces and change the profiles on Al Pacino's computer. But I guess if you control it sort of from the phone to the back end, it'd actually be much more complicated to create a fake ID.
Yeah, well, and actually, yeah, you're right. And I looked at this technology, and some of the safeguards are in place. And I was going to make the joke that all verification is done over the blockchain, just to kind of parlay an inside joke there. But my question is more kind of simplistic. And like I use Uber a lot, and I've been in a situation where I Ubered somewhere and my phone died, and then like, how do I Uber back? Like, I mean, like the battery life on these phones is still not great. Android is one thing; they have a lot better battery life than iOS devices. But I mean, I whenever I go somewhere, I carry a portable charger because I mean, for that very reason, if I Uber somewhere and then my phone dies, I have a hell of a time getting back anywhere.
Maybe there's a business opportunity there. Just have a bunch of stalls set up, like in on the strip downtown. You could just have a bunch of charging station.
Oh yeah, that is
there's like $1 a minute.
No cords required. They just have little dongles sticking out. You just put them in there. Yeah,
I mean they have them at the airport and it's free, but that's a service you could definitely charge for because people are so dependent on their phones now.
Yeah, totally. I thought you were going to go with and the thing is, if you could make them solar based, if you could,
there you go,
man, that would be awesome. I thought you were going to go with like the Rick and Morty angle, where in the Purge episode where they remove the Purge and then they all start fighting. It's like, gentlemen, what we need is a system. So I thought you were going to say, you can have these things called like phones, and you put them places, and then you can pick up the phone and call like a car that will come get you.
If your phone ran out, what if you had a physical representation of the ID that you could carry around with you?
I'm sure that's gonna go full circle.
It definitely is. 10, 20 years, we'll just be back to driver's licenses and. All right, so let's hop into the question of the week this week, which is actually really interesting. It's a little bit of a change of pace. But the question this week is, what's the difference between, and we've listed 3 here, but there's way more, a webmaster, a software engineer, a software developer, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these different titles related to software development. So what are the differences between all these different job positions?
Man, and there are literally infinite number of them out there. I mean, well, okay, approaching infinite. But some of the big ones. So obviously, you'll have like web designer versus web developer, mobile developer versus mobile engineer, senior engineer versus junior developer. I mean, there are so many different titles, and what they mean is so different. You have like and so some of them are clear. So for example, you have like a DBA, which is a database administrator, and so like the database administrator is in charge of kind of monitoring the database, making performance optimizations, sometimes creating the schema for data models, things like that. And what it really, where the lines really get fuzzy is among like the designers, developers, and engineers. And you can kind of glean a number of things from those three delineations. So like an engineer probably isn't going to have much to do with design, and a design, someone with the title of designer is probably not going to have much to do with engineering. But then there's like this middle ground where there's like developer, where a developer may be expected to do work of the designer and may be expected to do work of the engineer, or all of both, kind of thing. And so then you start talking
Well,
about,
actually,
well,
can you take a step back real quick and talk about the what engineers do versus what designers do?
yeah, okay. So and the engineer, the engineer is going to be writing code. And when I say code, I mean beyond, and if you really want to start a war, which I probably could right now, beyond HTML and CSS. Like some people consider HTML a programming language, and CSS a programming language. Others don't. And
By
it
some
doesn't
people,
really,
you mean designers.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't even really matter. I don't really care. But like, so a designer may be expected to know some HTML and CSS, regardless if you consider that a programming language or not. And but that's going to be it, like a pure designer kind of thing. Where an engineer is going to have to know way more than HTML, and probably may not even know CSS if you're an engineer. And so they're going to be writing like more of the hard level, or the hardcore code, the scripting, the programming that connects the design, the UI, the user interface to the what's considered the back end, which is the plumbing of the product, whether it's an app or just a background process that will do all of the kind of work. They bring the UI to life, kind of thing.
So an analogy might be laying out a magazine. Maybe the designers would be the ones in charge of arranging the items on a page and determining how stuff looks, and the engineers would be the ones who are responsible for actually bringing the content, not necessarily writing the content, but bringing the content to the designers to display on the page.
Yeah, but that, even that, as a simplistic example as it is, doesn't necessarily hold with who you're talking to. So for example, like if if you say designer, like a web designer, that person may only be responsible for creating the branding or the graphics for a site, or for a product like you mentioned. So like they'll look at the branding of the company and they'll say, okay, this company is they want to like uh, convey strong leadership and trust. So they're going to use like a blue and a gray color palette, and kind of their logo should be whatever to convey that powerful and trust persona, kind of thing.
Lots of
And
sharp
then
angles, straight lines.
yeah, exactly. And then they won't have anything to do with actual the layout. Sometimes again an engineer probably won't do the layout, but it may be someone other than a designer. It may be a developer who does the layout, which this is called like that's called functional design, or UI UX design, when you're actually designing the layout and the interaction of elements on a page. And so a designer may do the UI UX, or a developer may do the UI UX. Probably an engineer will not do the UI UX. However, I have seen titles that are UX engineer. So again, we're dealing with kind of
Word
like,
soup.
yes, exactly.
So, but really, the designer at the end of the day, supposedly, is sort of responsible for the look and feel of a site. whether that's generating the images or styling the pages. They're
Yep,
really responsible for the visual aspect of a website or an application.
that's right. So they'll do things like, in my mind, like a pure designer is going to do font choice. They're going to pick the font, like whether it's Arial, Impact, whatever the font is. They're going to do the graphics.
Wingdings.
Yeah, exactly. Comic Sans. They're going to do they're going to do the graphics. They're going to make the logo, and they're going to pick the color palette. That is what a pure designer is in my mind.
Okay, so I guess the developer is the thread between an engineer and a designer. So what are the responsibilities theoretically of a pure developer?
Yeah, so I would say UX falls into the role of a pure developer, and so that's basically designing the interaction of the elements on the UI. So when you click that hamburger looking icon on your mobile phone, the fact that the drawer comes out, that's a UX or a user interface interaction type of role, and that would fall to the developer. And so also when you click a link or you click a button, submit a form, the developer is going to make sure the data is validated and sent to the back end, which the engineer worked on, to send the correct data in the right format and validates it before it goes to that back end that the engineer has developed, kind of thing. The Also, the developer will, I think the developer should be very familiar with functional design principles, which include UI. So basically, they know they've gotten the font family from the designer, but the developer should make the decision of what the relative font sizes are. Like, what is the size of a headline font? What is the size of body text font? Where does the sidebar go on pages? How much spacing do we put between elements? Those are all like layout decisions that, again, some companies that are fortunate enough to have this have a dedicated role to this, and that dedicated role may be UI designer, but that typically falls in more of the purview of a pure developer than a pure designer.
We've got a question on Periscope, but actually before we get to that, I had a question. We sort of talked about this before, but it seems like the role of a developer is starting to bleed over into the role of the engineer and the role of the designer. I guess sort of as the tools have improved, to become jack of all trades, it seems.
Yeah, it really has. And I was actually reading a number of things about this on my vacation. Is a number of things are making the distinction between developer and engineer obsolete. And so we talked about a DBA, and so I don't think anyone would not consider a DBA an engineer. They're certainly not going to consider a DBA a developer. And so I
And
think they
DBA
would.
stands for database administrator.
Yeah,
I guess
correct.
we've also seen database engineers too. So again, these
Correct.
job titles are sort of all over the place.
That's right. So I would definitely consider that an engineering role. And so you have a lot of companies like Amazon, AWS, which are offering databases that are pre-configured and automatically optimized and maintained by AWS. So you largely remove the need for a DBA by using these services. You need a developer who still knows how to interact with the database and do certain very non-niche knowledge type things on the database. They have to know that they can't query 10 million rows and still maintain a responsive product. But again, that's not deep domain knowledge. When you're talking about like a database engineer or a database administrator, they're going to have deep knowledge on usually one vendor of a database. So like they'll be experts on an Oracle database. They'll be experts on MySQL databases. They'll be experts on Postgres databases. And so that expertise is great because for when you're running your own, because on a day-to-day basis, you have to know what those quirks are and be able to fix them or work around them or avoid them. But
And I
when
guess
not,
also sort of get as much as he possibly can out of whatever database you've chosen. I mean, these guys know all the tricks to sort of push MySQL to the max or whatever it ends up being.
right, exactly. And so that's another aspect of the hosted database. So like when you're working in the traditional model where you have a data engineer and you have, say, a you know uh, an 8 GB server running a Postgres database, and you're running up against that limit, it's not easy just to go to a 16 GB Postgres server for the Postgres instance. So you're squeezing every possible amount of performance out of that 8 GB instance. Whereas if you're on AWS, it's literally you flip a switch. Yeah, you add like $20 per month to your bill, maybe less, but then you've gone from 8 GB to 16 GB, and then you don't have to worry about that, for another 2 years, which in our world means you probably never have to worry about it again, because by the time that problem comes along, the product will have completely changed.
Right, right.
So the so it's a cost thing. Like, okay, we can pay a DBE, a DBA, 100 to 200 grand a year to sit around and kind of in the very few instances take care of these problems. Or we can just say, okay, we're gonna need to adjust the budget for hardware a little bit at times, and we'll kind of use money to solve the problem. And
It actually is pretty incredible because it's in many ways it's sort of our model, the on-demand expertise model, which is basically that AWS spends all of their time on this stuff. So
right,
they're gonna know more than even a full-time DBA that you hire, because they have teams of people working on this constantly. So
right.
it's sort of, you got to leverage any of these third-party vendors. You got to leverage just a wealth of expertise and I guess a level of manpower that you could never really implement on your own.
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, AWS has teams of engineers who are just dedicated to figuring this stuff out for you. So why are you going to kind of help them? You know what I mean? Like, they're already
Right.
paying for it. The other thing, and I'm sure if people are listening to my last statement, they're probably screaming that I'm just piling up technical debt by not optimizing. It's not just that. Like I said, probably if you solve a problem for 2 years, you've solved it for as long as you need to. However, think about the traditional model where you need to have a DBE or a DBA. Like, if something happens performance wise to a highly trafficked or highly utilized application, it's not acceptable to figure that out tomorrow or the next day. You need to figure that out immediately. And so you need that person like on call at all times. In my model, okay, we have a problem, right? And even if it's like flip a switch and it costs us $2,000 more for quote unquote a month, what you do is you just throw money at it to triage the problem, but then you have weeks to figure out a solution. And once you figure out a solution, then you can pull the lever back down and recoup that cost savings. So to your point, like, the expert is great because they have so much domain knowledge where if a problem comes up, they've probably encountered it and they can fix it really quickly. Whereas if we encounter like a deep problem, we can fix it, but we've never encountered it before, so we need to research it. So we can't fix it as quickly, but we can just triage it with some money and then have a long runway to figure out the long-term solution.
And the math makes sense because if you think about it, it might cost thousands of dollars, but if you're paying someone $120,000 a year, you're out 10 grand a month. It's never going to cost more than 10 grand a month to solve one of these problems. Or it might, but if you're sort of at that scale, that's not a bad problem to have.
Yeah, and the other thing that's weird about this, kind of going in another direction, and I read a lot about this, is we use a tool called React Native, and React Native, and then this is what's weird because they talk about the tools that you use, and that defines your role. Like, basically, the argument was React Native is for web developers or developers, and Swift and Kotlin or Java were for engineers, which I totally don't just agree with that, but I'll go with this for the case of illustration. So React Native allows you to write mobile applications in JavaScript and have them published to the Apple and Play Store in their respective native languages. Whereas the alternative is to create a mobile app using Swift, which is Apple's programming language, publish it on the iTunes store, and then write the same application pretty much in using Java or Kotlin and publish it to the Play Store, right? And so there's a lot of people, and most of the people who just bang on React Native have never actually used it. And they came to mobile development as Java engineers or as Objective-C engineers, so they don't have the background in JavaScript. So all they do is blast JavaScript is not a real programming language, and so therefore React Native is not viable. And so there's been a couple of big players that have been very supportive of the React Native community, which have kind of peeled back on React Native and have gone to the other model where they have two separate apps altogether. And so there's been this big furor, this big argument about, see, React Native isn't the solution, blah 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 blah. But these companies, it's Airbnb and Udemy, they basically posted their reasons, and the reasons were like, actually, Udemy, they basically had a revolt by their Java developers, which were like, we hate JavaScript, because they came from as Java backgrounds, and they basically like they
probably wanted to make JavaScript work like Java, and that's just going to cause massive headaches.
So they had a revolt from their Java team. They were like, we don't want to work with React Native anymore. And so when you look at it, when Udemy started, they had one engineer or developer for their mobile applications. So they went with React Native. Now they have 3 iOS engineers and 4 Android engineers. And so they have the resources to kind of say, okay, team over here, you're good to go with Android. Team over here, you're good to go with iOS. But really, there wasn't a need for that. The Java developers are pretty much like, no, we're not going to relearn. We're not going to learn JavaScript. It sucks. We want to do this in Java. And basically, their argument also was, I mean, they don't say it like that because they're trying to say, you know, we were listening to our team. But the other thing that was kind of allowed the Java engineers to revolt were, I guess, Udemy is making a big international push into like developing countries where the prevalent market is Android and like old Android devices, right? Yep. So like the developed binary, the compiled binary for a React Native app is bigger than if it were just developed native. That's actually what you download and put on your phone. So there was that. There was the fact that they were developing the Android devices, the application that was developed for Android devices became way different than the iOS applications. And then also because the devices were old, React Native, it uses a bit more horsepower, it uses a bit more memory on your phone than a regular native application. So those phones are devices, were chugging. So that allowed the Java engineers to be like, no, we're not optimizing for JavaScript. We're not figuring out how to optimize this for JavaScript. We're not doing all this. Like, just go with Kotlin or Java for this team. And so they're like, fine. Airbnb was largely in the same boat in the fact that they have huge teams now, and so they're able to focus on that. And so and again, it was mainly the Java team was like, we want to work in Java. And Java engineers, as they're called.
Do you think that's a remnant of just the overwhelming abundance of Java engineers who are left over from the Java craze of the 90s and early 2000s, and they have nothing else to do, so they need teams of multiple Java people?
I really think it is. I really think it is. And they just have to do something. And the problem is if I don't even know what the word is, but if you come as a Java engineer or a .NET engineer, like, you just think JavaScript is like the worst thing ever. And I don't really understand why. Like, then the argument is like, if you're coming from Ruby, JavaScript is fine. If not, learn Python. It's like, I don't understand that. Like, it's like if you were, I guess it's kind of like Romance languages versus like, what are we, Norse languages in English, like a Norse language. Anyway, so like basically
You mean harder to learn?
No, I don't even mean harder to learn, just like different rules. So like the Latin based languages, like if you know French, then Spanish is easier to
Oh,
learn.
oh, 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 yeah, 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 exactly.
And so like basically it's like
Versus
saying if
like
you're
Germanic languages like
right,
Swedish, German,
that's
or
what I was
anything
looking
like that,
for.
or
Yeah, exactly. And
Dutch.
so like it'd be like if you were a French speaker and you spoke Spanish as well, and so you basically told someone who is French, don't bother learning or don't learn English. It's a dirty language. Learn Spanish instead. Well, I mean, like it's just different. And if you're scared of different, then yeah, don't. But that's the only thing it is it's different.
I guess the tough thing is too that JavaScript is basically the future. So
Yeah,
uh,
and that's why like when I read these comments, that's what really I don't jump in because it's just a religious war, but like they're telling people like don't learn JavaScript, learn Python or learn whatever, and I'm all for that. But to tell someone not to learn JavaScript, you're really crippling their future prospects because you can fight it against it all you want, but pretty soon I guarantee you, and I mean like the next 5 years, the majority of apps out there on the on mobile devices will be written in JavaScript, not Swift or Java.
yeah, and just so our comment walls don't get spammed, I don't mean it's the future in the sense that I have a religious affection for JavaScript. I just, if you take an objective look at the landscape, it's only going one way, and that's more and more prevalent JavaScript in software development.
Right. It'd be like being a buggy salesman and trying to put forth, buggies as the future where there's cars now. Like, yeah, buggies have their benefits, they're cleaner, they cost less, but when the writing's on the wall, the writing's on the wall.
Yep. I was going to ask you about sysadmin, but let's put a pin in that for a second so I can get to this Periscope question, which is it's from DJ, and he wants to know, or she wants to know, which position should I apply for? I guess there are so many different titles, and I guess it's really hard now for anyone applying for a job to sort of suss out exactly what the expectations are, especially because job descriptions sort of cover the entirety of software development. I think everyone's expected to do everything now, but are there any positions that somebody should focus on if they're just starting to get into software development?
Yeah, I mean that's a really tough question because you're right in so much so that like if you are a if you're applying for a position and you open up a job posting, the chances are you're going to see that they just list everything under the sun that they can possibly think of, and they're like, you need 5 to 7 years experience. I don't know why they do that. I don't know why in the world they do that because no one fits that description. It's just ridiculous. I mean, could I say I have 5 to 7 years in experience with C++? I guess so, since I tinkered with CSS or C++ more than 5 years ago, and I still every once in a while jigger something around in C++. I don't know if that's what
Right.
they're actually looking for, or if they're like looking for like, production grade experience with C++. But if it's the latter, no one has that. Just no one has that. So,
And if somebody has 5 to 7 years experience C++, they're not looking for a C++ developer one position. Like they're not looking for an intro position for C++ after 7 years of experience. I mean,
right.
these are sort of like the entry level positions are expected to have half a decade of experience now, when the entire point of entry level positions is you don't have that experience, but you want to get it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean that's why I would try to suss out what the roles that would be expected of me are. Like we talked about a number of roles. So like um UI say if your role is to be the UI designer, meaning you're going to be responsible for doing layout and doing sizes, that would be a role. UX is a role. Am I going to be expected to program the interaction between elements on a page? That's a role. Am I going to be expected to create the API? That's an API developer. That's a role. I would try to pick out the roles that I would be responsible for, and then kind of back into the knowledge necessary to fill those roles, because the roles are pretty well defined, but what role goes to what title or what category of title, that's what really gets messy. And that's what is kind of company dependent.
Yeah, although I would say, yeah, definitely look at what the responsibilities are. But I think as far as, I guess it depends on interests. If you're, interested in design, you should look for a design position. If you're interested in back end engineering, you should look for an engineer position. But I think if you're sort of just getting into the field, trying to sort of suss out what your interests actually are, I think anything with developer in the title is probably a good place to start, because whether you're a web developer, software developer, whatever it is, you're probably going to have your hand in all the different cookie jars. So you'll get experience. My first job out of college was working at a startup. So not only was I doing the Rails development, I was helping out with the database, and I was also helping out with the actual design of the site. So it's good in the sense that you learn basically the entire stack. You get experience working with everything, and not only do you get to determine what your interests are or figure out what sort of catches your attention, just having that experience makes you sort of better positioned for the next job. I mean, people like to see that you have database experience. People like to see that HTML, CSS, front to back. So I would say, I guess, look at the responsibilities and see if you can get that experience. But if you're presented with 1,000 different job titles to choose from, maybe sort of pick the developer ones first, just to see if they sort of match what you're looking for.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's naive to think anyone who can be 18 to 22 years old can know for sure what their career want to be, what you want your career to be. But like, you can kind of know what you value a lot more. And so what I mean is, like, if you just want to make as much money as working as in the realm of technology slash coding, then like you're gonna make a lot more money like writing like institutional software for like banks, financial institutions, things like that. And there, your role is very well defined. You're going to be doing one thing, and like you'll make a lot of money, but you'll be doing one thing, and you'll be able to specialize that. And the problem is if that one thing becomes obsolete, so do you. But you'll while you're there, you're making a lot of money.
Java engineers go.
Yeah. So, but and then like if you're more interested in like being challenged and learning, then you should look into more going into like a small company, like a startup type environment where you will be kind of expected to do a lot of different things very, very well. And there's a good chance that after 2 years there, everything that you kind of have learned will be thrown out and you'll start with something else, but you won't be obsolete because you'll be good at adapting to a number of different technologies.
I always think it's better to be a big fish in a small pond, especially when you're just starting off in a career. I don't know if that's because that's exactly what I did, but it seems to work out. It seems to work out. You get more experience that way, and you have more responsibilities. So you're sort of, and you have more to point to that you've actually built, because you're in many cases the only one who's actually working on something. So
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
definitely benefits to sort of working at a tiny startup out of school.
yeah, I mean, I think to me it's much more satisfying to say I build products rather than I solve the issue of deadlock transactions.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's just me.
It's a little bit more exciting. So we talked about AWS sort of making obsolete the role of DBAs, in that they do it better and at a much lower cost. So talk to me though about the role of AWS in the actual uh, server side of things, in terms of actually delivering applications and mobile apps, because it used to be that you would have teams of sysadmins or whatever role they were called, and now you basically just have these third party cloud solutions that handle everything for you.
Yeah, I mean that's right. And kind of just take a step back because I wanted to talk about one other thing, and I'm kind of it's off topic, but I'll get back to the point. Is the other thing about like UI designers. So again, you would have experts who would focus on designing layout, right? Like they would just have deep, deep knowledge on layout. But now, again, with technology, analytics have gotten so good that you can collect real-time feedback based on usage of your application, and you can make UI changes based on that feedback. So you don't need someone, you need someone who understands UI, but you don't need this like deep expert on UI, because if you can read the feedback and understand what is happening, you can change the UI to be what the users are expecting, rather than having to have that deep knowledge where you've conducted 13,000 focus groups, you've conducted 100 usability studies, because you're getting the data in real time that you would have collected over the years of doing that thing.
Yeah, design by
So
feedback is sort of the wave of the future. And I guess
yeah,
on that point too, it's interesting that we're talking about a lot of these services that are out there that are sort of automating the jobs of these different positions. It seems like, and this sort of goes back to trying to choose a developer position, that's it seems like that's the farthest away from being fully automated or outsourced. It seems like you're going to be a little bit more useful a little bit longer if you focus on the software development side of things versus the back end stuff or the front end stuff.
yeah, and as a developer, basically, because what's happening is technology is putting more tools in the developer's toolbox. So they're actually making developers better at the expense of taking the tools away from the experts, kind of thing. Like they're taking like the tools that the experts would create and skipping the creation part and just giving them right to the developers. And so not only are you safer, but you're actually expanding and getting better because you're getting more tools constantly in your toolbox. And that's kind of how I was going to parlay this back into the system administrator situation where, I mean, we have instances now with AWS and others where you're basically not even worrying about servers. Again, you have to have a knowledge of response times and what causes those to go up, but you don't have to worry about configuring servers or worrying about what happens when a server fails, or hardening a server, meaning making it secure to attack.
Or
None
even
of those.
crazy stuff like if there's a massive earthquake where your services are hosted, what do you do at that point? I mean, all this
Yeah,
stuff is just handled for you. It's nuts.
that's yeah, exactly. So I mean, AWS spends gobs of money figuring all that out, and not even so much that, but one other title you'll hear is build engineer, which the build engineer, their job is to figure out the best way to get the developer's code on onto the platform that it's supposed to go to, called like deployment. So what's the best way to compile, test, deliver, and then serve the code that is written? Well, that's all automated now. I mean, it's called release management or continuous deployment, and it's all done for you. As long as as long as you can set stuff up, use either a command line prompt or a UI to set this stuff up. You set it up once and you forget about it. If you even have to do that, sometimes it's just built right into your stack. Like we use a couple of stacks on AWS where all that is just taken care for you, as long as you follow AWS's kind of instructions. And I think that like that irks a lot of people. I mean, I think it's the same reason why we make a lot of political decisions, is out of fear and anger. And I get it, but instead, if I were those people, they're obviously intelligent. I would be using that energy toward anger, or that fear and anger energy, into kind of retraining myself, because you can throw as many fits as you want or talk about how. I mean, that's the thing is what these experts do is they look at the one thing the automated tool doesn't do. Is, well, it doesn't do this. It doesn't do. Well, 99.9% of the people don't need it to do that, right? They don't need it to do that. So you can harp on how it's a terrible product because it doesn't do that one thing or doesn't take into account that one piece of data, but 99% of the people don't care. So they're still going to use it. So like just kind of get over it and learn, retrain yourself to take advantage of the tools that are being provided that you used to provide.
Yeah, especially because you already have a head start. You already you already have the knowledge base to become an expert in that, and you can sort of promote yourself and get more comfortable with the technology more quickly than somebody else could. So, it's kind of a bummer. And I guess it's probably a bummer if you've been doing something for 20 years and all of a sudden you're obsolete. But, that's sort of the state of the state right now.
I heard something this past weekend, and it's not uncommon. I've heard this a lot. Is that a lot of system administrators and IT professionals are being, this is crazy, they're being told that they have 2 years left, 3 years left, and or less, and their job is to train the developers how to use the automated tools that will be replacing them. That is their job.
Really?
Yes. And it's like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they do it. And if I were in that boat and I was told, like, you don't have any choice, like, no matter what you do, you have 12 months, and your job in that 12 months is to train the developers how to use these tools that we're using to replace you, then I would say, great, I'll do it, but I want a good severance package. Like, I would just use that to negotiate my severance package, because I said, otherwise, good luck training your developers. Because at that point, that's the only leverage you have left.
Yeah.
So use that little bit of leverage to secure a good severance package is my my advice to those people.
And probably spend the 12 months getting yourself ready, learning from the developers, and being, maybe even at the end of the 12 months, you've learned enough that they might want to keep you around, just because even though you've trained them, you still know more than they do. And you've also picked up in the 12 months enough knowledge that you're actually still useful to the company.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's kind of a depressing note, but we've gone way over this week. We're already at the 45-minute mark. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Gunner Technology live stream. Make sure to catch us next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Check out the blog post for this episode at gunnertech.com. Check out the podcast on iTunes. Check out our ebooks on AWS, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, Kobo, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. Make sure to hop on our Facebook page and sign up for the Country Shore giveaway. Country Shore Outfitters is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. And while you're on the Facebook page, go ahead and answer the question of the week, which this week, remind them, Cody, what that is.
The question of the week this week is, do you carry a wallet? And a wallet being defined as any separate device used to carry your money, credit cards, or identification.
So hop on our Facebook page and answer that question of the week, and make sure to tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time for the next episode of the Gunner Technology live stream. I'm Derry. That's Cody. We'll see you next week.